Buen día a todas las personas que nos acompañan.
Good morning, everyone that is joining us at the second session of Bridging the Digital Divide in Rural Areas of Latin America and the Caribbean towards a digital direct agricultural revolution. On behalf of the Director General of ECLAC, Dr. Manuel Otero, we welcome you. We invite you to participate actively through comments and questions through social media or through the Zoom tool. Today, we will start our second session of the forum. This one will focus on public policies to bridge the digital divide. As part of joint effort between ECA and the Ministry of Science, Technology, and Telecommunications, we would like to share with you a video related to the Fab Lab initiative. We will share a brief video with you. Work focused on disseminating technologies based on the digital agriculture revolution and benefit of small producers, women, and youth in rural areas, improving their standard of living. We seek to transform rural areas into areas of progress, and laboratories like Fab Lab is an initiative of ECA together with the Ministry of Science and Technology that came together to create this Center of Technological Information and Training for producers and rural youth to become familiar with new technologies. They will experience and work with prototypes, finding solutions. A workshop of innovation in digital manufacturing favors creativity and encourages education and continuous learning.
Para continuar con la sesión del día de hoy,
To continue with the session today, allow me to offer the floor to the Assistant Director General, Lloyd Day. Thank you, Emmanuel. Good morning, and welcome to this second forum of bridging the digital divide in rural areas of Latin America and the Caribbean towards a digital agricultural revolution. On this occasion, we will focus on public policies to bridge the digital divide. We will have an opportunity to hear about the digital agendas throughout Latin America and even in Europe, always focused on agriculture and the rural world, as well as on concrete experiences in some countries. The introduction to the session will be headed by Dr. Paola Vega, Minister of Science, Technology, and Telecommunications of Costa Rica. She is a graduate in electronic engineering from the Technological Institute of Costa Rica. She has a master's in microelectronics and microsystems from the Technical University in Hamburg, Harvard, Germany, and a PhD in microelectronics at the Nanoelectronics Institute and Medical Electronics at that same university, becoming the first Costa Rican woman to obtain a PhD in electronics. Congratulations. Madam Minister, I offer the floor to you. Hello, good morning. Greetings to you, Mr. Assistant Director. I thank you very much for the invitation, and a special thanks to all the guests that are with us, all participants in this forum. Warm greetings from the Ministry of Science, Technology, and Telecommunications. As you were able to see in the brief video, we truly have great interest in our ministry to tap technologies as what they are, a cross-cutting tool for multiple applications that can enable all productive sectors. And of course, we are interested in the creation of our own technology and the adaptation and incorporation of existing technologies. We see especially digital technologies are the foundation basically of, or the technological heart of society nowadays, as you well know, not only due to the personal use of technology uh, for work or study and for all our activities within the family or friends, and for citizen participation, but also now technologies are filling in more gaps in all our activities we carry out. So within this, in our National Science, Technology and Innovation Plan for 2015-2021, we have considered digital technologies and services as a cross-cutting element for applications that go from agriculture, food, water, etc., varied applications. And for this reason, we have been identifying opportunities. So through public policy instruments or based on public policy instruments, we can develop a series of pilot projects that will allow us to disseminate the use of these technologies and especially encourage newer generations as users of technology to apply these in productive activities that are related to their areas of interest. Among this, one of the initiatives is the Laboratory of Digital Agriculture. We started this with the ECLAC with great success, in fact, as you were able to see in the video. And this has motivated us. It has been warmly welcomed by the agriculture sector. And there is truly not only awareness that we can encourage productivity and competitiveness, but there is also a desire to incorporate these technologies and learn how to handle them. The pilot plan has allowed us to undertake our first experiences. And with these, we have learned a series of actions and lessons that will translate into staggered programs, first at the level of provinces, and we hope that over time it will lead us to cover the entire country. And this will allow us not only to improve the conditions of the agriculture sector, we have also been working with other programs in coordination with the Ministry of Agriculture and Livestock, but also to prepare the generation of farmers of the future. One of the problems we have, particularly in Costa Rica, is that farmers or producers have a very high average age, over 55 years of age, and we see with great concern this this gap. So all these people have also generated their empirical knowledge, which needs to be shared with the newer generations, along with the tools we have today that back then they did not have a chance to use. So this is two ways. We see that the interest of younger generations in digital technologies would certainly allow us to get closer to agriculture with them as catalysts of this digital transformation of the sector. And we facilitate this generational relief that leads to an upgrade in the sector by incorporating technology and by bringing in younger people, also working together with the people that are currently involved in agriculture. With that, we transfer the knowledge both ways, as I said, and at the same time, we are preparing the people that in the future will take over this productive sector. We are also very interested in the potential of developing the rural territories in a faster manner and reduce the migration of people from rural territories to urban territories. What we need is for these people to see that there are interesting opportunities, viable opportunities, economically viable for them right there where they are. And based on the realities that they have been experiencing, but now with this technological twist to it to make these much more profitable and efficient and thus provide greater resilience to rural communities, as well as a new health perspective. And we have seen a whole range of possible lines of action, where we have all the way from the use of digital technologies to improve crops themselves and their productivity, as well as e-commerce and their incorporation into value chains, improving logistics, and to directly offer products to the target markets. All of this would be much easier with the use of digital technologies. But to do this, we have two major lines to work on. First of all, we need to continue strengthening access to these technologies. And for this, we need to strengthen the deployment of telecommunications infrastructure, alternatives with which we can take as promptly as possible access to internet to all these rural areas. On the other hand, not only within the area, but also connectivity. The different homes or establishments that are the foundation for farming and agricultural production, and also access to equipment. And we're talking about much more than computers or tablets. We are talking about additional devices, for example, to monitor crops. And on the other hand, once we have all these, once we address all these equipment gaps, we can work on the most productive course so that all these possibilities of access become a reality. And digital education is what will begin to close this cycle. And for this, as you well know, we can find a whole range of digital knowledge among people. There are people in the agricultural sector where we have to start by very basic things related to the use of a computer. Others are much more advanced, but what we have to do is walk down this road with them until they can come to a point where they can apply all this knowledge. For example, under controlled environments or with crops out in the open, and take one step further where through data analysis and other computer techniques we can obtain or draw important conclusions and make database decisions to better manage crops and to improve the productive activity. But this is quite a road ahead of us, and it is accompanied by other tools like digital fabrication and manufacturing, and this is being tested at the laboratory we have just started together with ECLAC. Additionally, we can say that from our ministry, allow me to tell you a bit about our experience. As foundation to disseminate knowledge, we are taking, first of all, the partnership with ECA, and secondly, to expand the geographic scope of this initiative. We will also be working on the smart community centers that our ministry has throughout the country. We have examined these smart community centers, which centers are most consolidated so they can take a leap to become community innovation laboratories, so that we, through these laboratories, we can introduce more advanced stages of digital literacy. And based on this, we would be taking better access as well as better training to the rest of the country. Another initiative that could help strengthen this work we have started is a draft law which is currently under discussion at the Legislative Assembly in our country, which is the National Digital Literacy program. The objective of this program is to find the enabling conditions so that we can reach digital literacy for the entire Costa Rican population and start with this right from elementary school and advancing in skills and knowledge when they reach the secondary school, so that when they graduate from secondary education, we have a good foundation where we can further develop more advanced techniques for this and other productive activities. So we certainly support this project, and we are paying close attention to its development. And if the draft law is approved, we consider that would be a tremendous leap forward for the country, because with this, we would have the possibility so that in the country and in all territories, we would have digital literacy foundation to develop better skills. And for those people that, because of age or any other reason, are not taking part of the Costa Rican public education system, for example, people that have finished high school quite some time ago, but have received no further training in digital areas, we will use these smart community centers and the community innovation laboratories for this. With this, we expect that the revolution of the Industry 4.0 reaches the agriculture sector, and we can take advantage of all advantages we have as a country in this field, but further enabled, putting us in a much better position in the international market, but generating the main objective, which is social mobility and national development. So I wish you a very successful day. We are very interested in listening to all the good practices, examples of things that have done elsewhere, and even suggestions and comments, observations you may have to improve our policies, so that we can also learn together in this process and implement these through instruments that can bring greatest benefit to everyone. Thank you so very much. Thank you, Madam Minister. Thank you for your time and participation, and thank you so very much for your interest in this institution, the Fab Lab. This is a great space to attract young people, maybe some from your own university, from the tech, and bring them here to Coronado to develop new technologies that we could share with all ministries of agriculture of the hemisphere. So thank you so very much for your time and your participation and for your trust in us. All other Rica authorities want a Fab Lab like this in their own countries. So this is a model for the entire hemisphere, and we thank you so very much for that. Thank you so much. Now, I would like to introduce the moderator of this session, Fernando Schwanke, Secretary of Family Farming and Cooperativism of the Ministry of Agriculture, Livestock and Food Supply, Brazil. He is a forest engineer, graduate from the Federal University of Santa Maria in Rio Grande do Sul, Brazil. He also has an MBA and a postmaster's in business administration from Northwestern University in Chicago. He was Secretary of Agriculture for the municipality of Rio Pardo in Rio Grande do Sul, and later mayor of that same municipality. He has also been consultant in matters related to agriculture for the United Nations. 2 weeks ago, we had the honor to have him at the headquarters here in Costa Rica. Fernando is a dear friend of Vega. Mr. Secretary, I offer you the floor now. Thank you very much, Loide. Thank you so much for the invitation. For us in Brazil, it is a tremendous honor to be able to share with such outstanding authorities share such important information for our current days, and particularly to discuss the challenges our countries face. I would like to greet Dr. Jorge Duarte, who is also with us, as well as Emmanuel Picado, who is responsible for this subject matter within IECA, all my colleagues that will participate this morning in a very important panel, and that is focused on bridging the digital divide in rural areas in Latin America and the Caribbean towards a digital agricultural revolution. We in Brazil, and I believe all countries, are working very hard in the subject matter also, which is a subject matter of the future. Maybe 20 years ago, we would not have been discussing this matter, but today, this is centermost to carry information and technical assistance to farmers and producers. For you to have an idea, in Brazil, with the data from the last agricultural census, today we only have 20% of farmers that receive technical assistance. In southern Brazil, the figure goes almost to 50%, but if we go to the northern and northeastern region, maybe 7-8% of the farmers receive some type of technical assistance. We believe that digital tools can certainly help expand the attention to these farmers. This will not substitute personal technical assistance, but it will allow to take important information to many of those places where this information does not go today. It is important to say that this panel aims to encourage obtaining maximum benefits in digital technological efforts with the objective of ensuring no one is left behind. As specific objectives, share information on the opportunities and challenges of digitalization to contribute to more inclusive agriculture and rural world, sharing cases of success and lessons learned from projects and public policies implemented in the different countries in Latin America and the Caribbean, related to the reduction of the digital gap in rural areas and indigenous nations, to share experiences on the utilization of ICT tools in rural areas with emphasis on their impact on the inhabitants, particularly family farmers, indigenous peoples, youth, and rural women. And lastly, another specific objective is to define elements for future projects that will allow to execute joint actions to create awareness, dissemination, ownership, training, productive use, empowerment, and in general, digital literacy in rural areas of the countries of Latin America and the Caribbean. Well, our session today will discuss public policies to bridge the digital divide. We have several specialists that will be joining us, so I would like to begin by introducing Dr. Octavio Sotomayor. He will have 20 minutes for his presentation. Octavio Sotomayor is agronomist engineer, a graduate from the School of Agricultural and Forestry Sciences from the University of Chile, a master in economic sciences from Agrofaristec in France, has been National Director of the Agricultural Policies Office and National Director of the Agricultural Development Institute. He is currently Officer of Economic Affairs at the Economic Commission for Latin America and the Caribbean, ECLAC. Dr. Octavio, You have 20 minutes for your presentation, and when we're approaching the 20 minutes, we will let you know. Enjoy it.
you. Thank you, Fernando, for that introduction. I'd like to start by thanking EICA for this opportunity of sharing some ideas and exchanging views. I'd also like to greet all the different colleagues and participants in the forum. I will be brief, so to begin, I have some words to give us some food for thought, a philosophical reflection by a great Polish economist that was talking about the history of capitalism. And he said that what happened in 1820, 1830, what he says basically is that capitalism was installed shockingly, so surprisingly, nobody expected it. And this might be the case of what we see today. We have a discussion on what is happening with the pandemic, where the world is headed. There's also the matter of time. So it's important to bear this in mind in our thoughts. This is the agenda for my presentation. I will quickly refer to fiscal matters, the impact of the pandemic and agricultural policies, the role of the state, and especially some thoughts on low cost public policy and referring to digitalization in that context. How much digitalization is advancing, and finally closing with conclusions. We don't need to spend too much time here because it's obvious to all that the pandemic has had great impact in all countries of the world. Of course, this will bring several consequences: more poverty, less economic growth, higher public debt. So, based on that, I know that those of us who work with the agricultural sector, always focus on public policies, and we will face an environment of large tax restrictions. So we have to be very creative. The challenge is to reactivate the economy, but also to transform it. We've lived through the first worldwide systemic crisis of the 21st century. So everyone asks themselves, will this happen again? What will happen in 3 to 5 years? One of the many lessons we have learned in the pandemic is that we have limitations. There's planetary limits, but then there's also something, at least I have seen, and I saw this in Latin America before the pandemic. It's not just with the pandemic. The state apparatus is under pressure in all of Latin America. They're all weakened, and the pandemic just worsened this. Considering this, one big question is how can we progress towards a more organic, integrated society that helps us stabilize? In that context, I believe we can have digitalization. I'd like to focus on my presentation on the most vulnerable uh, areas of agriculture and those who are lagging behind. Territories that are falling behind, poverty, all these are in large challenges in terms of investment. To truly move forward with family agriculture, we need investment. And traditionally, those of us who work in public policy for many years now, there's this idea that public policies should be differentiated. Some policies for smallholders, for large holders, for advanced territories, for uh, territories that are lagging behind, for young people, for older people, etc. I believe we need to introduce a new distinction, and it's not necessarily an obvious one to face challenges in the future in public policies. And this is the difference between high cost and low cost programs. What you can see in the pictures, if you can make them out, I cannot really see fully because of the screen configuration, but the first picture up on the top is a picture of local markets. That's cheap to have a producer's fair. It's easy. It's cheap. You just need a mayor to give you some space on a square in the city center, and you have the stalls put up, and that's it. And that's quite different from the third picture you see from the top down. A water canal. That, of course, an irrigation canal requires engineering. It's costly. You need cement, so high cost. I'd like to highlight something that resonates. There's current work from ICA and the IADB. I will be getting into the details soon, but in any case, I'd like to highlight one important idea from that work, which is finding endogenous solutions. So to highlight, we have to find this synchronization we've had with ICA from ECLAC, the agricultural team at ECLAC. We have the same idea called low-cost solutions or autonomous activities and your own resources. For example, if you have to design public policies in the coming years, the key is to ensure that you are taking advantage of all local leadership. This is vital, ensuring community participation and all the resources that can be locally sourced. And these are many, many times we don't see them all. For example, 20 years ago, rain was lost in Latin America. Today, the rainwater is collected. So there's several examples of resources in the community itself that are not visible. We need to find a way to identify these so that we can lower costs and have more impact from public policy. So again, leadership, your own resources, this all has to be combined with digital technologies, advanced knowledge, scientific knowledge, biotechnology, bioeconomy, that come from outside the territory. So there is a nuance there. We're not thinking about endogenous solutions in the strictest sense. It entails a combination among finding what the territory itself has to offer, but also elsewhere, what they can find extraterritorially. And now, if we specifically focus on the digitalization, which can be the decisive factor for this new stage of globalization. 10, 20 years ago, it was all about trade. In the coming years, it probably will be digitalization. And what we see here is that this is a process that is inevitable. It advances very fast. The pandemic has accelerated it. It's very heterogeneous. There's a large impact on employment. So we ask ourselves, for example, what will happen um, after what we saw with crops in the northern hemisphere, in California, Europe, with migrants. Now in the south, we are harvesting, looking at the same sources of stress, larger properties will digitalize because they've seen the uncertainty it entails to not have enough labor to harvest the land. So this is quite obvious with digitalization, but then it also allows for new ways of collaboration. And I'd like to insist on this. I believe it's vital. Digitalization is functional for a low-cost strategy. It means working under a low-cost strategy. This is a picture to give you a clearer idea. This is a trial that was done in 2017 in England. For the first time, there was half a hectare hands-free, with no intervention of human beings from the very first moment until the harvest. That kind of thing is already going on in the world, and that is our reality. And in Latin America, I would like to congratulate AICA for the study they submitted with the IADP. I think you've already mentioned this week on this forum. The figures are quite clear, so I won't delve into that. But essentially, we have 77 million people living in rural areas. They do not have access to minimum standard connectivity with the index based on the IDB index. There's 36.8% of the rural population with access to significant connectivity. And the graph also shows you the information that shows more or less the same figures graphically, and you can see great disparities in each country. If you zoom in, this is again more figures of a project in developing areas in Nicaragua. And just to highlight some facts, 38% of people have a smartphone. Again, there's a gap, a gender gap. And then for women, it's just 10% with a smartphone, and the other figures are known to us. So one of the questions this forum is asking is how can we bridge this digital divide? I understand that there's other speakers that have mentioned the broadband divide and what's happening in mobile phones. There's a very fast process, and this brings me back to Polanyi's reflection in the beginning. In 2 years in mobile telephony, we were promised that we will have all the world connected, including those territories that have been lagging behind thanks to projects that are being launched today. It might be more or less that time frame, but in any case, at most 5 years, we will likely have progress for connection in terms of mobile phones in the world. And going back to the ADB study, I think it was a very interesting idea of sharing the community networks in Argentina, Colombia, and other countries, where you see the civil society that has opened a dialogue with their municipalities and state authorities and has found solutions. Solutions that, as the same study quotes, are not necessarily represented in statistics. These are some figures from Mexico. Quite quickly, again, we performed a survey. We just finished a study on the progress of digitalization in different countries in Latin America. In the case of Mexico, we see when we asked a series of people related to these matters regarding the type of use they have of in different computer platforms. They use it a lot for checking prices, diseases, temperature, and climate conditions. Another question was the impact of the pandemic. And you can see that there's a main change in technical assistance and commercialization or trade. Again, here we should highlight the financial aspect. In Latin America, digitalization has had little impact in the sense of financing. So we probably would need to have a specific seminar for that. But beyond that, importantly, the whole food system is digitalized. That's a trend. And digitalization here refers to technologies and based on work by the OECD for this, We are performing several studies at ECLAC, whether regionally or at country level, to understand what's happening in food systems. The first conclusion is there's a very differentiated impact. There's an impact on ecosystem, chain coordination, short circuits, technical assistance, consumers. Digitalization clearly has an impact on all projects related to water management and biodiversity management. A big challenge here is that digitalization should work in service of a transition towards agroecological transition that we believe is essential to face the challenges of the future. And now I'd like to share some examples of success stories that have called our attention. The first one is a WhatsApp group where you have the whole cacao chain uh, discussing plans to improve competitively and everything that was related to impacts of the pandemic. It's 244 professionals with about 8,000 messages. A very interesting experience because all the sectors of the chain participated and brought a shared vision. For markets, it's also quite interesting to see what's happening. Wholesale markets went digital with the pandemic. Retail markets did the same. Retail markets, I'd like to say that it's different from the farmers markets, which is traditional, or producers markets. In this picture, we have a producers fair. And again, these are the types of cheap public policies that can truly change the whole system. And when you talk to producers that are selling in different markets in cities, in the case of Chile, many of them already use Facebook and other digital media. And on the other side of the slide, you can see an alliance that was created before the pandemic among the main traders of grain, ADM, Bunge, Cargill, Louis Dreyfus, and Kofkola, a Chinese company, and they're also digitalizing. They are integrating digitally to improve their logistics. As for extension and outreach, this is a very important topic, and it's very interesting to see what is happening in Latin America. And this is very spontaneous. We don't have many figures, but there's this sense that there are many WhatsApp groups that emerge spontaneously. And there's a case of a Uruguayan group that's quite interesting, pictured here. And then there's also virtual agencies, the experiences in Argentina, Paraguay, and other countries where an institution responds to queries digitally. And for consumers, I think we can see quite obviously here how consumers reacted by performing Google searches for categories of food, and there's a jump between February and April of last year when the pandemic started. And digital sectoral agendas, this again is quite interesting. The challenge is to create digital sectoral agendas. There's an experience for this in Colombia, but and also in other countries like Uruguay, Brazil, Chile. There are processes that are also going towards this direction. A key there is dialogue between ministries of telecommunications, of agriculture, and the civil society to organize this digital advancement. Again, it's very spontaneous, and it's very important to have frameworks that help us organize this process to collect information and the digitalization process. To close, this process of digitalization of the food system also looks at a specific role for young people. You see approximately 14,000 young people organized in different digital communities, transferring technology basically. And I believe that in parallel to what's happening with producers, there's another phenomenon that is at the level of startups and young scientists. There's a Latin American network of sellers in bioeconomy. Many of them are about 200 young people working on this and establishing connections with different institutions that create technology and producers. Sometimes what happens is that producers get lost with so much information. So you need a specific link that can tie this and facilitate the delivery of information. Some conclusions. First, and I insist, we will have a difficult fiscal situation. This forces us to find new public policies. We also have to insist on the importance of thinking of specifically low-cost solutions. And in this sense, digitalization can contribute very interestingly in different dimensions. The role of local organizations is also vital, and obviously, whatever local organizations can do. But of course, always in a dialogue with the state. It does not mean that the state has to be ignored. The role of the state is always key. We just need a new balance between state, companies, and civil society. That is what we wanted to share on our part. There's also some references here that are available. Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Octavio. Very interesting presentation. We can conclude that all our countries during the pandemic have seen the acceleration of many actions. In Brazil, also with commercialization, and many WhatsApp groups were created, new apps for smartphones, for cooperatives that started trading and buying from each other. Many interesting experiences in that sense that came about in the pandemic. I think we have a lot that we can exchange among our countries in terms of information, finding endogenous and local solutions and low-cost solutions is also very important. And we should be discussing these things in our new times now. Also, digitalization at the service of production to fight poverty in rural areas, not just technical assistance, but digitalization to bring healthcare information, education. There's many possibilities. Thank you very much. Very interesting. And now we have Dr. José Emilio Guerrero, who is a professor of the School of Forestry and Agricultural Engineering of University of Cordoba, Spain. He has been a vice director of Foreign Affairs and currently and also director. He's currently the coordinator of the PhD program, inter-university program on agricultural engineering, food economics, forestry, and rural sustainable development. He has been Secretary General of Agriculture and Livestock of the Board of Andalusia between 1994 to 2003 and coordinator of technical and scientific support of the Spanish agenda of the Ibero-American Program for Territorial Development. Thank you, Mr. José Emilio. You have the floor.
Su micrófono está
Your
desligado.
mic is muted.
No le escuchamos.
We are not hearing you.
Muy buenas tardes,
Gracias.
españolas. Buenos días para todos.
Good
señor
afternoon here in Spain. Good morning to you over there. We've already met some of you in some forums on digitalization. So hello, everyone, and thank you to AICA for the opportunity. Thank you to all the team, Director General, Deputy Director General, and very particularly Emmanuel Picado, and also the delegation of AICA for Europe. And so with that, I will start my presentation. I'd like to say many things. I'll try to be brief. I will also have a representative from the Ministry of Agriculture and Food from Spain who will give you other details and help us round out the numbers we have in Europe and the processes we have here. For my presentation, I followed the suggestion of the organization, so some background and the purpose of the digital agenda in Europe, the main strategies to support agriculture and rural areas to reduce the digital divide, and some thoughts and lessons learned that might be of use to share with colleagues in Latin America. First, these things might already be known to you, but I'd like to highlight them. The EU has a foundational element in the agreement for how it works. It's the type of constitution with hundreds of articles, and based on these articles, public policies are developed. So these are commitments that all member states share. So Articles 101 to 109 say that there should be a competitiveness policy for the whole union. There's also a policy for research and innovation in Articles 179 to 190. There's also a policy on education, training, youth, and sports, mobility and transport policy, an industrial policy, and a market policy. In this foundational treaty, we do not have anything specifically related to digitalization, but truly, digitalization as a cross-cutting theme is linked to all the policies. So, for example, I will mention the industry policy of the EU. There's a communication from the Commission that starts the movement, and then in the image shows there's a whole area for digitalization, incorporating the industrial policy to prepare it for the digital area. There's an initiative on accessibility and reuse of public data, connectivity, and the 5G action plan. And so all these policies now have an important part looking at digitalization, but always based on that treaty, the foundational treaty. In 2010, the digital agenda for Europe was conceived as one of the 7 flagship initiatives for 2020. Very briefly, the idea is to develop an ecosystem to support digitalization, a complex system that was promoting several policies in the midterm time frame for that digital agenda. A bit later on in 2015, the EU set forth the digital single market to ensure the main legislative proposals continued, looking at the value of big data, improving public services, and especially to create standards that could be shared in the Union. More recently, we have the political guidelines for the next European Commission 2019-2024. And first of all, the first commitment by the European Commission is to prepare Europe to ensure it is ready for the digital area. Of course, an economy that works for people, Europe that is stronger in the world, promoting the European lifestyle, Green Pact, and I think my colleague will refer to this more in detail. What does this mean? It means there's a series of actions. Preparing Europe for this new digital era entails actions to develop artificial intelligence, strategy of data, high performance computing, online platforms, cybersecurity, and connectivity. And to illustrate these pillars that are the basis for all the budget and different directives that are mandatory for all member states. And so the new space, the new digital program, 2021-2027, has a budget that I have highlighted here with this green arrow. Look at the great importance provided to artificial intelligence. Down here I have a timeline so that you can see the process. It wasn't quite long. From 6th of June 2018, where the Commission presented the proposal for the Digital Europe program. Then we have a commission presenting the new instrument after public consultation. And finally, by 1st of January 2021, this year, the strategy starts. To highlight some of the larger areas, from my point of view, one of the most important is the European strategy to create this single data market to ensure that Europe is more present worldwide, to foster different processes and services that are innovative. This has many areas where it focuses. I don't have time to share all this, but there's opportunities throughout the year where I've given some of the details. This was one of the most important outputs, the European Data Portal. Right now we have 81 catalogs there, but with 1,217,000 data sets for different areas of the EU, but all of these are open data. And it's an important process and one of the most active in agriculture. We have the environment, economy and finance, energy, again, very important. So to highlight one of the most important elements to consider for the digital development of agriculture is the availability of open data.
Another element is that of the new approach of the EU towards artificial intelligence based on trust and excellence. That is to say, there are still some concerns, a big debate and a whole strategy to base this on trust and excellence to encourage institutions and companies. This is another of the major sections. I want to show you this because most of the groups of experts that are meeting at this time, and they have been meeting for years now, this has increased exponentially the concern about cybersecurity, particularly the new 5G networks. But cybersecurity issues are first most among technical, budgetary, political, and policy concerns. When we launch many strategies like this, the first thing we do is develop an index to monitor this. And this, here I am showing you the index we are currently using, the Digital Economy and Society Index, which is supported on 5 major areas: connectivity, human capital, use of internet services, integration of digital technology, and digital public services. So in this sense, here we can see this situation here of the different countries. And this is the mean for the European Union, and in asterisk, with the green asterisk, we have Spain. In this concrete case, well, the aspects of connectivity are above the mean, as well as digital public services. And this has been the evolution. Notice basically a drop in the DESI index that went from 40%. We can see the change in the DESI index over the years. We started at about 40% in 2015, and notice where we are now. The second part of my comments now will focus on some examples of the agri-food sector, because everything I showed you before is for all areas, energy, transport, et cetera, et cetera. I know that many of you, and perhaps much better than I, know what agriculture in the rural world in the EU is all about, but 4 figures that will be very helpful. Well, there are about 11 million agricultural exploitations in the European Union, 290,000 agri-food industries, and 15% of imports and exports, excluding the trade within the community. We can see a large number of consumers, 500 million consumers. What have we done with agriculture? First of all, we have created the European Association of Agricultural Innovation, API Agri, that works to encourage and foster agriculture and competitive and sustainable farming. We share information, et cetera, et cetera. And a key element which is important to highlight is that the support for agriculture is based on the digital innovation hubs. To support them, there are investors, accelerators, universities, large companies, technology centers, small and medium enterprises, et cetera, et cetera. But we can see its usefulness. We still have a long road to go. More significant investment is required from the different nations and companies. This is a current status of the digital innovation hubs. In fuchsia, we have those that are currently operational in blue, those in preparation, and in yellow, those are candidates. The idea is to have an accompanying system that will help drive digitalization processes. One aspect that I believe can have a big repercussion on the partnerships and work is that the EU is working hard to develop open code platforms to share with everyone. Perhaps the most important and the one that is currently being used massively and intensively in agriculture is that proposed by the FIWARE Foundation for Smart Cities. This is a platform with 3 modules: digitalization and intermediary, a broker, and a series of subroutines. It is not even worth dwelling on this, but definitely this drives the standards, which is something fundamental. It simplifies the Internet of Things. It transforms big data into knowledge. It unleashes the potential for open data at the adequate point in time. And I would dare say that this is a very important element that we need to work on with the different stakeholders. Perhaps one of the things that has modified the way we understand and do agriculture and rural development and to fight against the movement of people into urban areas is the observation of the land, of the earth and climate. We have Sentinel satellites. To give you an idea, it is possible openly, freely to have an image of the entire world in 10 by 10 grids of the entire world. This will help monitor pests and estimate our harvest. The EU is working hard on promoting nano-satellites, geo-trackers, both for communications as well as for observation of Earth and climate, and see the role of these false satellites that are full of sensors and that will allow a time and area sensors that are much more focused. The EU policy regarding research has allowed a spectacular development ever since 2012 to 2020 with scientific papers related to agriculture, the world, bioeconomy, rural areas, bioeconomy, and technology. Notice, in less than 10 years, notice, almost 19,000 scientific papers have been written. This is a very sound baseline to examine certain elements. What other things are being done? And I understand that my colleague from the ministry is going to go into the greater detail in this. But for example, we have implemented a public-private partnership. What you see in green here is at the provincial level. And each one of these provinces has a project to generate partnerships, generation of knowledge and technology. This is an example. The one I am highlighting here, I am working on it, but this is from the EPIAGRI group called Young Agricultures in Network. Profitable, efficient, and diversified. What for? To design a collaborative digital platform that facilitates inclusion of youth into agriculture. But just like this one, there are hundreds of other projects. Also important are the research projects. These are the projects that are the Cordison database approved for 2021. As you can see, most of the projects have very important elements of digital technology, precision agriculture, automation and robotics, all the matters of management. And I end my comments with 4 or 5 major points, which is my third block. So what things can we draw from all of this, and how would we like to share these and develop these thoughts with you to learn from errors, but working with the ICA and all the countries of Latin America and the Caribbean? First of all, we have the innovation and digital process. This is a great innovation. We need to use adequate technologies, and we will hear more about that later. We need to focus on the needs that society can accept, not superficial or artificial needs. No, we need to go to something that society will accept. Resources and acceptable costs. The companies and businesses and civil society must work in partnership with the the sector. And we need to help innovation by improving with an important cohort of factors. There is no one-size-fits-all or one recipe, so we have to adapt this. And now, speaking about adequate technology, it must translate into a significant action. Otherwise, it would be useless. It would not be appropriate for this point in time. It has to be economically efficient. It needs to be flexible, robust, and reliable, and must provide easily available information for farmers in the chain. One element we have learned is that there must be commercial demos, so that we can make use of word of mouth and rescue local initiatives through these commercial demos and through continuous improvement. Here I have dared to very uniquely summarize the latest seminar held to analyze the multi-level strategies for digitizing agriculture and rural areas in the EU. And these main components are, well, first of all, we need a positioning, a vision. We need to deeply analyze the needs and gaps, develop skills, education, and training. There must be infrastructure and adequate technology, data governance, which is usually ignored. That is of utmost importance. Those who have the data, their ownership, their risks, commercial models and use cases and services need to be transparent, digestible. We must investigate and generate knowledge continuously, have an ecosystem approach, connecting large and small, governance of the process itself, of communication, evaluation and supervision, finance and funds. And one aspect that is last but not least is that we need to find actors who are capable of leading this implementation. Otherwise, it won't work. There needs to be someone at the head of this. And I will end with 3 quotes. I believe it is appropriate to share with you some thoughts by the Vice President of Gartner. This is a group of analysts that examined the evolution and expectation of digital technologies and other things. I'm not going to talk about this evolution ever since 2019 through 2021, but Brian says socioeconomic challenges without precedent that have occurred in 2020 demand organizational elasticity to transform and prepare for the future. So let us do things with variable geometry. Let us be plastic. This first suggestion I wanted to share, and two are very timely. Natalie Taylor from the City Hall of London to turn London into a city hall. A journalist asked her, how can we do this? This is such a big complexity of turning London into this big city like that. And she responded, I don't know, but I have something that works, and it begins with something small that responds to actual needs. Do it good, well, do it quickly, and tell everybody. And more recently, the Commissioner Maria Gabriel said, the COVID-19 pandemic has proven that deeper cooperation across borders, disciplines, and cultures is the only way to recover from the crisis and build a resilient society. So once again, I would like to thank Giga for allowing us to share and set the foundation for cooperation that needs to be across borders, across disciplines, and across cultures. And next to last comment, digitalization is necessary but not sufficient. It is an opportunity, a magnificent opportunity, particularly for agriculture and small agriculture, mostly family farming, very timely for rural development. But this requires global action and innovation in this scope and others. It is not just to come up with a wonderful idea, but it is more important to persevere. And this is my final thought. We are fully convinced that we have, with all the data we have, the digitalization process will help for health, education, employment, traditional know-how, ecosystem services, efficiency and productivity, well-being, leisure, and sustainability. This has to do with family agriculture, with productive farming, productive agriculture, and this is what we see through the indicators. We must work on these processes of digital innovation because they are an important factor for the future. Well, thank you very much, and that was it. That is what I wanted to share with you. Excuse me for going through this so quickly and so much I left out. But I hope these have raised some curiosity and interest. Thank you very much, Dr. José Emilio. Presentation with a lot of information. There are 2 points that connect to the Octavio's presentation, well, many more, but 2 that companies, businesses, and civil society need to be the major drivers of this process with the help and perhaps with the governance of the governments. But this would be a completely different seminar to discuss how private initiative could help developing digitalization and bridging the digital divide. And the other point is resources and cost, adequate costs. Furthermore, we will need to work on low costs, but that these are used appropriately. So all our countries will be facing difficult fiscal situations, so there's a lot of hard work to do there. So now let us begin our panel discussion, experiences of public policies and lessons learned in reducing the digital divide in the agriculture sector and rural areas. We will begin with Ms. Rocío Wojski, agronomist engineer with an MBA in environmental engineering, water management, and is currently Subdirector of Innovation and Digitalization at the General Directorate of Rural Development, Innovation and forestry policies of the ministry responsible for the implementation of the Rural Innovation Partnership in Spain. So I offer the floor to Rocío Wojski. Thank you so much. I will attempt to share my screen. Here it is. First of all, I would like to thank ECLAC and its organization for the Ministry of Agriculture, Fisheries and Food of Spain to share its experiences in digital transformation in the agri-food sector and focus on European public policies. Allow me to also thank all participants at this session, all of those that are watching us. It is a true pleasure and an honor to share panels with the rest of our speakers, such high-level speakers. This has been very interesting to listen to the presentation by the Minister of Science of Costa Rica and other speakers. We have formed we have made parallel comparisons, although you are very distant from Spain physically. We see a commonality in the strategies to implement. The organizers have asked me to tell you a bit about the actions that we have implemented at the ministry to foster this digital effort and to focus on the EU policies for agriculture, and as well as the instruments that the EU has implemented. So my presentation will be as follows. I will speak about the multiple instruments that have been implemented for digitalization within agriculture and why we got to that point. Then I will tell you about the reaction of the Ministry of Agriculture in this context. And lastly, with the strategy underway, I will tell you the situation we are currently in with the latest novelties, both in European policies with the Green Pact and the situation the pandemic has put us in. So allow me to begin, and I apologize if there is a lot of information on the slides. I will try to go to the point as much as possible, and the rest of the information you can see later at your leisure in the presentation. Let me see if I can move this along on my own. Okay, I did. Here, what I would like to highlight is the productive structure of our sector. José Emilio has told us what agriculture is like in the European Union and the land occupied. And from what he said, I would like to say that this, in Spain, it is what he said, but above the mean. In fact, we have higher elements. Our export volumes are significant. Positive trade balance, a productive structure which is very spread out. And additionally, agri-food businesses are mostly SMEs. And we occupy rural territories, 84% of the national service, but with only 16% of the population. As has been said before, this is a sector that is very male-focused, and for basically, we're focused on the elderly people. The community agricultural policy, as you will know, is focused or was developed, first of all, to ensure food security in the EU. But this is a very dynamic policy that reacts and adapts to the changing processes internationally. And around 1996, there was a conference in Cork in Ireland where they discussed and decided to make a big change, moving to have two pillars, one to foster the agri-food sector through assistance only to produce, let us put it that way, and another one, a pillar of supporting rural development. I won't explain this further because it is self-explanatory, because, well, the objectives are completely different. What we want first is to ensure economic viability to all these operations, and after that, what we want is good social connections. And now in this context, environmental sustainability, which is so important. Environmental sustainability will be the guiding thread of many of the decisions to be made, and brings us to this digital transformation. 20 years later, in 2016, we examined once again all the changes, and we developed CORC 2.0, turning around the agri-food sector performance and actions that were required. And this led to a statement with 10 points. Point 7 is very striking: encourage knowledge and innovation. And if you could read the bold, the first paragraph, it focuses on to have this innovation for the agricultural sector to be more productive and sustainable. It is very important for the inhabitants in the rural areas that the farmers have access to appropriate technology and latest technology. They talk about access, both structurally as well as knowledge-wise. They must be trained to have access to knowledge. This conference 2.7 particularly has been a very important milestone for the development of community agricultural policies. And in this next period, they will make available certain instruments to achieve this goal. Let's see if I can switch. Yes. This was one element. Now let me tell you about another one that occurs in parallel. The Director General in charge of Agriculture, DG Agri, and the one in charge of research have a committee, a joint committee, for several years now, ever since 1974. The Permanent Research in Agriculture Committee, consisting of experts and many working groups. Their conclusions were the foundation to produce recommendations for the European Commission, for the actions of the European Commission and its decisions. So within this committee, they started to talk about knowledge and information in agriculture, and they concluded that it was necessary to develop or create a specific and permanent working group in generation of knowledge for agriculture. This is the foundation on which the cross-cutting objective of the next agricultural common policy will be developed, and these systems establish that digitalization is a fundamental element to train farmers, to encourage this knowledge transfer and produce innovation as an objective and as an interest. So they talk about responsibility. Here you have this in blue. We talk about the responsibility of the administration, support to farmers, the importance of big data and information and communication technologies, and the relationship with all stakeholders and actors in the system. Another element that fortunately Professor José Emilio has already introduced. Otherwise, I would not have time to cover it all, but I would like to add to what he said. There are a series of actions carried out by API. First of all, to develop consortia. These are very important because they bring together actors of different natures, putting farmers in the center, but that respond to the needs and opportunities of a farmer through the joint effort with other important players in the system, as are the businesses and companies, which are fundamental to attract this transformation and innovation. Technology centers, universities will help on the science side. This is something that will underpin our actions with all the different actors, social and government and at all levels is so important. So these operational groups that are working on innovation in this manner are funded by CIP, which is a fund for this common agricultural policy. It's a very good practice, something worth replicating, because it has created an ecosystem of innovation where there are already groups of farmers, scientists, university professors, technology centers, and companies that know their needs, that know each other, and that have been in contact, have developed this inertia to innovate. And I must say that in the case of the national rural development effort, we have been helping with the creation of these operational groups through specific projects. 20% of the credit is to develop work in the digital area. And the response has been very good in this sense. With the 20% credit, basically the request and concession of assistance to ensure digital transformation has become basically turned into 50% assistance. So there is a lot of knowledge, a lot of inertia, a significant digitalization. Aside from helping to implement and make funds available for these innovative projects, is involved in other activities. Among these, the workshops, focus groups, seminars, where they bring together different experts, similar to the event of the Water Day, but with a very significant participation of actors in this system. So EIP for the 2021 period has carried out a series of actions, has analyzed the digital transformation process that has led to decision-making by the member states and institutions within their public policies. Among these, the Ministry of Agriculture. One of these was mentioned by Professor José Emilio, which was the analysis of the multi-level strategies here.
With all these actions in this context, the different reports by the European Parliament, and the different digitalization themes for agri-food systems, then we have a proposal for regulations for the coming policy on agriculture for the 2021-2027 period, that for different circumstances will certainly be implemented starting 2023. There's matters of elections of the Parliament and the European Commission in between. Of course, the pandemic as well. So this will all delay the implementation. But as I've said, the cross-cutting objective is modernization, and this has to lead to achieving the other 9 specific objectives we see on screen: 3 economic, 3 social, and 3 environmental. Innovation and digitalization, or modernization, are the key elements to ensure we achieve the modernization for systems of innovation and knowledge in agriculture having a key role. There's a specific objective, number 2, economic, to improve orientation towards market and have greater competitiveness, with emphasis on research, innovation, and digitalization. Again, it gives us an idea of how important it is to achieve these objectives. As I've mentioned before, one of the articles includes mention to knowledge systems in agriculture. We need to strengthen them, describe their organizational structure, and member states have to describe the strategy they have to develop digital technologies in agriculture and rural areas. How do we prepare these strategic plans for the PAC and the Commission? First, there's an assessment of the current situation in the sector, looking at all the specific objectives that we mentioned and the cross-cutting one. The matrix that helps us analyze strengths and weaknesses and looking at the objectives with a logic of intervention process, we select the adequate interventions, the ones that would help at the same time to achieve specific objectives suggested by the Commission in its new regulation, and also answering the needs we have found. As you can see, our assessment and our needs, many are related to the digital transformation process. So we will be designing interventions for that. We're in the process of doing it so that we can support that digital transformation process and specifically to strengthen knowledge and innovation systems in agriculture. So their agricultural advisory or technical assistance is what you call it, for farmers is vital. And now let's look at the reactions in Spain with all this context for the digitalization process in our sector. This political context in Europe and in the country, I will not detail it because we've heard it from Professor José Emilio, but I do want to say that the digitalization strategy is a strategic document. It has been designed with no specific term, but looking at experts nationally and their recommendations. They debated throughout several sessions spanning about a year to ensure how this process should look. And we had stakeholders from all areas, universities, technological centers, companies, agri-food companies, technological companies, associations of producers. There might be others, but just to give you the idea, there's several there. And of course, Professor José Emilio himself was one of the experts of this focus group. Based on the conclusions, the document was drafted to establish how the Ministry of Agriculture could respond to the assessment and different recommendations. This was put up to consultation with our autonomous communities or our regions. They also have their own competencies and authorities for agriculture and food, looking at the different offices and administrations that would be involved. We opened it to open consultation with NGOs and others, and we have this strategy now, that document for this digitalization. The main objective is to support the digital transformation of the agri-food system or sector with a sectoral specific strategy that makes use of cross-cutting strategies and bringing them to the agri-food context. We don't want to duplicate efforts or budget, so we'd like to coordinate as much as we can with any other cross-cutting strategies and capitalize on any actions being held on other offices and administrations. Again, the digital transformation has the main objective of no one being left behind. We have family agriculture, our population is older, and we don't want to leave anyone out of this. So we have to make use of synergies existing between all these stakeholders in the process. Specific objectives of the strategy are three. First, to reduce the digital divide, and I'll focus on this one because, of course, it's related to our event. The strategy is structured around each of these specific objectives that has strategic lines and then measures. For the digital divide, first we have connectivity and the need to guarantee connectivity and infrastructure, and then training, a need to address the adoption gap that we've called to ensure there is access to new technologies. So with these measures listed here. And these would take the form of actions through biennial action plans. So there's our specific steps based on the measures with specific budgets and with a specific time frame to be developed. Objective 2, promoting the use of data. This again is vital. We need to have open data and have data used in a structured, organized manner for all. This is the basis for ensuring that you can develop all the digital transformation processes, or in other words, that agri-food systems and companies have to change their productive systems. They have to change them digitally, but also and to ensure economic drivers for several agro ICT companies that can develop apps and products and business to develop the economy based on the use of these data. So all the data we have should be open in an organized manner for all stakeholders to make better use of them. It will benefit all the parties. It will also help us in the different administrations and offices to do our own analyses and make decisions based on this information. The third objective is to promote business development and new business models. This is very important to reinforce innovation and knowledge systems in agriculture, to support companies in their entrepreneurial side, but also consolidating companies, ensuring there's new developments and training and advisory provided in all the different stages they may need. For example, all their management side and others. And of course, to become an economic force. So this is how this is structured in the document. And I only have a minute, so this is the action plan and the different actions and steps I've mentioned for 2019-2020. And now we are looking at the next plan. And lastly, I wanted to focus on the European Green Pact that materializes through two strategies, farm to table and biodiversity. These strategies have said very specific targets that member states have to achieve. One of these is access to broadband internet with 100% of rural areas covered of their population, at least for 2025. This is a trick in itself, if you will, because it's telling us that to ensure all the other objectives can be met and all the targets can be met, we need to develop precision agriculture methodologies with decision making, and we can't get this if rural areas are not connected. The European Commission also will set some recommendations for member states that can include in their action plans to ensure they meet these Green Pact objectives or targets. And lastly, of course, we want to say what the COVID crisis brought on. All the analyses we've already made, and we heard speakers say it before. I won't give details because you can have the presentation. And it's reiterated. But in any case, we have a fund, the European Fund for Recovery, and it will allocate budget to different member states. And the actions taken by the states have to be geared towards supporting and training to ensure we achieve the Green Pact targets and the digitalization of the sector. Those are the main objectives of this recovery fund. That is how the EU wants its member states to get trained and get prepared to face and react to the context we have now after the pandemic. With that, I apologize if I took too much time. I know it was a lot of information. I had so much to say, but I'm very much willing to take your questions. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you, Dr. Rocío Wojski. There is a lot to say, you're right. Many of us have many things we'd like to share, and I think they're also interesting. All presentations will remain available for participants to review them after on their own time so that everyone can access the information. And thank you very much. Now I would like to give the floor to
a Carlos Jiménez, que es ingeniero
Carlos Jiménez, electronic engineer of the University of Colombia, specialist in project management of in university, master's degree of the Javeriana University. With broad experience in the public and private sectors, he is in charge of a direction on infrastructure under the Ministry of ICTs, leading projects to take connectivity to all the country. He's also worked as commissioner and advisor for the Commission for Regularization of Communications and in the Management Office of Planning under the Spectrum Agency and lead engineer of projects in the National Commission of Television. With that, I give you Mr. Camilo Jiménez. If you can do it in 15 minutes, we appreciate it. Thank you. Thank you and good morning, everyone.
Bien, bueno, en primer lugar quiero agradecerle a
First of all, I'd like to thank Ica and all the participants today for inviting me and for allowing me to share some thoughts with you. Thank you also for everything we've heard from you and to the different participants for your interest. My area of expertise is not necessarily agriculture. I've worked for a long time in communications. But I do agree with former speaker, Ms. Rocío, that these types of discussions help us find common points. I'd like to especially highlight something mentioned by Rocío, that you require 2 elements for any person in the world to participate from what we've called the 4th industrial revolution: access to internet, or connectivity as we're calling it, and the skills to be able to make use of them. If we don't have those 2 elements in each of the people, they will be left out or excluded from the so-called 4th industrial revolution. From the social point of view and developmental for all our countries is something that we have to consider. For today, particularly when we're focusing on agriculture, if we want the agricultural sector of any country to have active participation and to develop in this new socioeconomic world, we have to guarantee access to internet and that people working in agriculture have enough skills and knowledge to take advantage of it. I will be covering 3 simple topics. First, a brief description of Colombia and our rural areas.
Luego les vamos a
And
contar
then I'll share some of the public policy decisions made in the past 2 years to ensure we have connectivity. And lastly, a general overview of connectivity projects for rural areas that can hopefully serve as examples for others. And also, if there's any thoughts or feedback from your part, we appreciate it. First of all, Colombia is a large country. The continental territory spans more than 1 million square kilometers. In the map, we see
si ustedes trazan una casi que una
if
línea
you have a straight line crossing this diagonal here that I'm trying to point out, Colombia is divided between densely populated territories towards the north and the Amazon departments towards the south, and it's actually borders with Brazil and Peru and Venezuela. This means that of that 1 million square kilometers in Colombia, about 60% of the territory is jungle or very low population density areas, and we have a very strong concentration of the population in the northern side of the country around the Andes That also means that this territory, divided into about 1,100 municipalities, concentrates its economy and population in 150 municipalities. So about 15% of the municipality generates 70% of the GDP. And if we want to look at the population concentration, urban areas, it's about 80% of people concentrated in urban areas, with scarcely 20% in rural areas, which is about 11 million inhabitants. So that's the geographic distribution. And now we have something that I believe is a concern for all Latin American countries. Overall, rural inhabitants of Colombia are considered poorer than those living in urban areas. 64% live in poverty, and it might even be close to 70% if we look at the hard facts, under the line of poverty. And there's also things that have been mentioned elsewhere, and a population that's getting older. Rural people are on average over 50 years. There's also the displacement or movement of young people from rural areas to cities. And supposedly they find greater opportunities in urban areas. And of course, that also means the supply of basic needs and provision of basic services. Now, specifically on internet access, there are great differences. In urban areas, to date, we have penetration in homes, urban areas about 60%. In rural areas, data in 2019, it was less, it's about 20% in rural areas. So that's the first strong division we see between rural and urban areas. And there's a 40% difference in internet access at homes. Then we ask ourselves, why don't we have internet? Some reasons are quite homogeneous. First, that it's very costly. Most people that don't have internet access don't have it because it's expensive. And if we're trying to meet our basic needs, if internet is costly and you don't have enough to pay for your food, then of course you will prefer to eat than to access internet. But if we have population that does not access internet, they're being excluded from economic development, and then there's a larger social gap. So this is a very important time to act. The second element that is very related to the possibility of using it is knowing how to use it. And many people don't consider internet necessary. They don't see it as necessary because they have not yet seen all the tools they could use for their personal development. And the third and more complex element for rural areas, and there we see a clear difference with urban areas, is that rural areas don't have the infrastructure or coverage. Service does not reach these areas. In a country as large as Colombia, we've made great efforts to take internet coverage to our cities, but we still have much to do to take this type of service to our rural areas, again, excluding about 12 million people. Therefore, we have our ICT plan 2018-2022, and there we have 4 pillars. I'll focus on the first 2, which is the ICT environment for digital development, and social digital inclusion, which is my area of responsibility, where we make great efforts to bring connectivity to our citizens. Other areas of the ministry that are not necessarily within my expertise, which is empowered citizens and humans for the digital environment. And we also heard Octavio mention, we also have a digital and sectoral transformation area with sectoral agendas, one specifically for the agricultural sector, for example, and the whole task of support from the ICT offices and administrations to help develop digital transformation in other areas. The first element is a favorable environment to develop ICTs. And here we made a decision from the telecommunications sector, which was important to help implement in the other sectors. The sector's vision previously with the radio electric spectrum or the wireless resource had a very economic standpoint, just to take advantage of it economically. But now we've changed it to ensure that our vulnerable and poor populations also have access. This change in the law helps us ensure we have public policies that are focused on rurality and the different things we wanted to do with the radio electric spectrum to take to our vulnerable populations in the country. And as another speaker has mentioned, the law has mechanisms to promote community systems. Because in areas where the return on investment is not very attractive for large multinational companies, community systems are quite relevant. And they give us great possibilities to meet the needs that don't necessarily fit in with normal commercial expectations. The second one is social digital inclusion. And we have divided it in urban and rural areas. We want to decrease the digital divide in terms of connectivity, social connectivity, and we'll see some interesting projects there to try and bring infrastructure and service to these rural areas. It has a very assistentialist approach. And another approach to bring mobile services to the most remote areas through that we're not reaching or getting service through the private means only. We have our digital rural areas project with over 1,500 solutions. These are public points of access to internet on a side road or specific square in small towns with maybe 20 homes, just a small concentration, about 100 people living there. We have provided public access points throughout Colombia. In many countries in Latin America, there tends to be a central square or the market. There is an area where population tends to gather around. In our very religious countries, it tends to be around the main church. In other areas in Colombia, it depends on where the largest public school is located. So around those areas, we've placed these free public internet access points 24 hours a day. And the ambition here is for operators who have these projects that are worth over $17 million. The state suggests that we can help them develop the infrastructure, but they would have to have their private business model to try and ensure sustainability in the medium and long term for these types of solutions. Because on other occasions, what has happened is that these points work for a short amount of time, because when there's no more public resources, they are gone. Something interesting here is that the operators, as part of their business strategy, are not charging for connectivity as such. They're charging for services provided to institutions that are interested in reaching rural areas. And here in particular in Colombia, we have institutions for agriculture that bring funding, training for agriculture farmers, and they're the ones that are creating the income that can lead to long-term sustainability, and the connectivity is not being charged for the citizens. I think that's quite interesting and could be implemented elsewhere. In parallel with that, we have a larger connectivity program, the largest rural connectivity project that we've called Digital Centers. This involves over 14,000 solutions for connectivity and free access, 98% of them destined to public education institutions, but they all replicate the model of having free access to internet for all with a very large investment. And to highlight here, this policy underwent a whole process in Colombia to have a state policy that transcended government terms. This will cover up to 2031. It's very important for rural areas because these areas don't really have a good return on investment for private sustainability. So we need to ensure financing over the long term to guarantee connectivity and for population to truly take ownership of the use of connectivity in their everyday lives.
This was the figure I wanted to show you. Here you can see how these programs start, they grow and come to a point and then drop again. This is what we want to correct. So first of all, we increased coverage tremendously. And secondly, we developed a long-term plan that is satisfactory. And lastly, in ending, I was saying that as to mobile coverage, there's another effort that requires a much more complex deployment effort. There was a commitment, the spectrum awardees, to take coverage to 3,658 rural locations and take 4G mobile technologies. So that has been a tremendous improvement. This is a 5-year plan. We calculate the investment in a bit over $600 million. And something important is that this coming May will be the first year. So by May, we will have 954 locations with 4G, and we will continue to grow over the next 4 years until we reach this scenario. The image to the left is the 4G coverage currently in orange. We can see the current coverage, and we hope to reach the green part on the right where we have significant coverage. And this is the same representation of the previous map, but in a graph, how we do away with the second and third generation systems, and we expand coverage of fourth generation. We still see a gap without coverage, but this is a significant effort for the next 5 years. And that is what I wanted to share with you. I am available here and in any other place you want to contact me for. Thank you very much for your attention. Thank you, Camilo. Very interesting to listen to Colombia's plan. Allow me now to offer the floor. We have talked very much about private enterprise, private initiatives. Maryleana Méndez, Executive Director of the Inter-American Association of Telecom Enterprises, is also a graduate in computer sciences, master's in information technology, information and communication technologies, and as I said, Executive Director of ASIET. She was a standing member of the Council of the Superintendents of Telecommunications of Costa Rica, chair of the council for 3 different years, for 3 years in a row, and she headed the telecommunications market opening in Costa Rica. Before that, she was director of projects in Latin America for British Telecom, deploying networks and value-added services throughout the region. So with you, Maryleana Méndez. welcome, and thank you very much for your participation also. Thank you, Fernando. Good morning, good afternoon for Spain. First of all, I thank ICA for the invitation. For me, it is an honor, a pleasure to be here, and I believe it is very important to be able to share views with other sectors, because normally the ICT sector meets with the ICT sector. And okay, we are at the point where we are preaching to the choir. All of us involved, and I was listening to Camilo mention this, we clearly understand the role of digitalization and what we need to extend that digitalization. But the attraction of sectors like agriculture is essential to form a group of initiatives that are sustainable over time, that they generate a difference, and also generate productive use of connectivity. For us, this is extremely important, and I believe it is an idea that has been maturing over time. It has really been a great pleasure to listen to the different presentations today and all these elements related to digitalization in the agriculture sector. Let me share with you the reality of telecommunications networks in Latin America. Please let me know if you can see the presentation, please. Yes, we can. Thank you. So first of all, what is connectivity like in Latin America? To the right, we will see there are 12 countries listed, just a sample, with households with and without a connection to the internet. These are ECLAC figures for 2018. To the right, the gaps we see, the gaps between countries, between urban and rural, and between quintiles of revenue. So evidently, as is seen in the graph, the greater the income, the greater the connectivity. We can see there are countries like Costa Rica, for example, Brazil, Chile, Colombia, that have significantly improved their levels of connectivity. And these are public policy actions specifically focused on improving connectivity. The quintiles with lesser income and the rural and urban areas. As to mobile access, here we have figures from 2015 provided from GCMA. There was 47% subscribers from mobile internet. 40% of the total population are single subscribers of mobile internet. Of these, 43%, the service is not subscribed, although they do have the infrastructure. And 9% were areas not covered at all by any type of mobile internet service. But if we look at the first quarter last year, 55% subscribers of mobile internet, 41%, although they did have coverage, did not subscribe to service, and 4% of the areas were not covered. So as we can see, the percentage that least changed is the individuals that have coverage but do not sign a service, do not subscribe a service. We heard before that this is a matter of affordability, that I just cannot pay for it, so I do not sign for a service. Or it could also be a matter that I don't find it useful at all. That is another issue. So in this sense, we need to reaffirm that telecommunications networks are the foundation for digitalization. This is the enabling infrastructure that runs under all elements that add value to business, particularly to agriculture. But these telecommunications networks are essential to advance in this digitalization. Telecommunications networks that are of a varied nature. There are mobile telecommunications, fixed telecommunications, satellite telecommunications nets, and there are going to be other components in the ecosystem, but all of those in the end form one single network that allows for connectivity and therefore enables digitalization. Now, what can we see when we talk about universal coverage and rural coverage? Well, there are inconsistencies in policies. Most countries have defined connectivity as an essential element, digitalization as the way to improve productivity. And due to the pandemic, digitalization is the best way for recovery. But what is the reality when we look internally into the countries? Well, there is a fiscal incongruence here. Taxes, for example, telephones, smartphones in many countries of Latin America are still considered luxury devices and therefore have a very special high tax on them. The tax burden for telecommunications in Latin America is an average 51% higher than for other industries. And in regulated sectors like transportation, 39% a tax less than telecommunications. Here we see taxes equivalent to alcohol and tobacco. We know that the situation we are in makes it difficult to discuss this matter, but there have been efforts in many Latin American countries to lower these costs towards the telecommunications operators so that they can expand their coverage and service and improve, obviously, the technologies available. Something very inconsistent are the hurdles to the deployment of infrastructure. It is documented that in many municipalities, in many countries in Latin America, 12 months go by when a request is filed to erect the telecommunications tower until the time that component is put into service for inhabitants. 12 whole months. 12 whole months in technology is a huge change. So we cannot aspire to have a very rapid deployment if we have this hurdle of this magnitude. And it is even easier to request permits to build a highway than to request a permit to build a tower for the digital highway. And we were talking about the radioelectric spectrum. This may sound a bit more technical than what it really is. The radioelectric spectrum is a natural resource that is used in certain ranges for wireless communications that particularly are used for wireless broadband services. The ITU has an estimate of the radioelectric spectrum, how much spectrum the different countries should have allocated by 2020 to have abundant resources so that the cost for deployment of infrastructure lowers this. The more spectrum, the lower the cost of infrastructure. So in this case, Latin America, in average, only has 29.3% of the spectrum proposed by the ITU allocated for 2020. So we are way behind what we should have allocated. And as mentioned by the representative of the Ministry of Science and Technology, we must forget about the collection side of this. Before radioelectric spectrum was assigned, basically thinking of the money that would bring in. Most of that money was used for the treasury. It would move into the treasury system. But nowadays, the Colombian law is very modern, in fact. What was recently approved, in fact, and precisely provides that the radioelectric spectrum is a natural resource that must be used for the development of individuals, not to focus on tax collection or fiscal collection. If we continue to examine these inconsistencies, there are resources that come directly from the operators' funds. About 1% of their gross revenue is for universal service funds. The universal service funds are precisely created to produce universal coverage. And much of these funds, unfortunately, go to the state, and they are not used to close the gap or are tied to one single service. FUSC in Brazil was linked to fixed telephony, public fixed telephony, fixed and public. Imagine accumulating today more than $5 billion that were unused for the development of connectivity infrastructure. Resources have been invested in transportation networks, but I mean, that is a completely different story. These have been assigned to construction companies to create transportation networks, but the design itself has not been the best. And there has been an overlap of these networks subsidized by networks that are already available from the private initiative, and therefore these networks go unused, but it is also necessary to do away with some of the or rescind contracts like the truck contract in Peru. Regarding the radioelectric spectrums, although it is moving, the funds for universal service in some cases did not support the new vulnerability created by the pandemic. We have figures from a study by the Telecommunications Center of Latin America for 4G coverage to reach 95% of the population and 65% of the households are covered by fiber optics. An investment of at least $161 billion will be required by 2025 in Latin America. It is important to note that 80% of the investment made in telecommunications infrastructure is by private operators. An element that it contrasts with other sectors in the infrastructure, as could be carriers, water sanitation, where most of the investment is made by the state. In telecommunications, the private enterprise has been making this investment, allowing us to come to the point we are at. However, the path ahead of us requires a joint effort. Now, particularly, as I was saying, universal service funds are a tool to support the investors' effort. The universal service funds seek precisely to intervene in those points where the market, due to its conditions, cannot go there. So here is precisely where we talk about rural areas and the quintiles with the least income. So what is the cycle we have or should be generated by a universal service fund? Well, first of all, they assign projects as I was saying, for coverage or for subsidy to demand. This is invested in the market, and this in turn improves coverage and gives greater, makes it more affordable, and therefore there are more users benefited, and therefore more para-fiscal contributions because we generate new markets where they did not exist before, and that causes this cycle of investment of the universal service funds. These universal service funds and the design of project is in hands of public policies. Public policies should correspond to cross-cutting public policies, as we saw the European public policies, as well as was mentioned by the MISIT representative. These are public policies, but the implementation of those projects should technically be established to avoid market distortion. That is what we must avoid in a universal service fund, avoid market distortions. In the European Union, which is a very good example of a universal service project, the economic recovery funds they are generating, and particularly Spain, has been a good example in developing fiber optics. The coverage and use is way over and above the average in the entire EU. And they have established a series of criteria to take advantage of these universal service projects. And they begin by data analysis, public consultations on projects to be undertaken. So here's where the community must take part. All these elements I am mentioning, all the previous speakers have mentioned these expressly. We need to involve the population in all these projects. This must be a competitive selection process, that it be technology neutral, that there be elements to reutilize infrastructure regarding subsidized infrastructure there, that we have a wholesale access in regulatory terms. It means that not only the operator that develops the infrastructure is the one that uses it, but there must be other users also, and that there must be elements associated to wholesale pricing, monitoring, and recovery of resources, progress reports, and total transparency on the use of public funds or public resources. So these elements of sustainability, of universal service projects are essential, and that is where agriculture becomes an element of demand for rural connectivity. When there is connectivity and there are productive projects behind that connectivity, well then we generate demand for the services deployed. And of course, as I was saying, we start this virtuous circle of the Universal Service Fund kick in, this aggregated demand, which also includes public services, schools, health centers, security points for the ministries of security, et cetera, to this aggregated demand. We can still add today through the appropriate skills and through the technology available today, we can add agriculture as one more element for productive demand of this connectivity. And here we have some examples that are not exhaustive. There are many other specific efforts in the agriculture area that you know better than I do, and that are focused in several countries of Latin America, where together operators, government, and farmers have developed. Allow me to start by saying that a minor change could make a big difference. In Mexico, for example, Mexico has the most costly radioelectric spectrum in Latin America. This is one of the most expensive, in fact, in the world. If I use a reference, it is twice as costly as in the United States, for example, almost twice as much as the radioelectric spectrum in Germany. So there was a study undertaken. If the cost of the spectrum in Mexico had been at the average in Latin America, which is not low, by the way, it is also high, but just by being within the average, there would be 5.5 million more Mexicans connected to the 4G network and 10 million additional Mexicans in the 3G network. So these are elements that a minor change could cause a huge difference. And in fact, on this cost, and let us begin with the cases, this cost was going to increase even more. Of course, we understand the fiscal crisis that is affecting all of Latin America. But thanks to the fact that the Mexican Congress understands the importance of this, they avoided this new increase in the recurring payment for radioelectric spectrum. And yesterday, in fact, they signed an agreement with operators for deployment in rural areas. These are elements worth highlighting. Costa Rica. Costa Rica has a universal service fund, significant as compared to the size of the country, because it was clearly designed like that in the law. And the regulator proposes to include in a subsidy to demand the small and medium enterprises, but within these SMEs, we include expressly goals to include small and medium farmers or agriculture producers. What does this mean? Well, that the fund provides part of the cost for connectivity, and the small producer provides or pays for a small part of that cost. So we seek that that group of people that do not use the internet, although they do have coverage, can be smaller, can reduce. And this supports the sense of having or using the internet for productive purposes. In Colombia, well, we heard very clear examples with all the details, but we believe it is important to highlight the utilization of the universal service funds, both for supply as well as for demand. And there was a downward adjustment to of the contribution last year for the next 2 years, I believe, because they understood the magnitude of the challenge and the magnitude of the income problem currently due to the pandemic. If we go to Peru, yes, thank you. I'm almost ended. In Peru, regulatory innovation allows to develop the project that is called Internet for Everyone, which is a merger of different groups, an operator of platforms, an operator of telecommunications, a development bank, and others. And these cause linkages with local businesses and have been able to connect more than 2 million Peruvians in rural areas. Chile, there has been an accelerated development of the 4G network because they lowered the cost of spectrum and established coverage obligations. In Brazil, well, they gave great sense and coherence to the cross-cutting IoT plan, which is closely related, obviously, to agriculture. They lowered taxes to devices by law, and they just adjusted their law for the Universal Service Fund, going from a direct contribution to the development of infrastructure instead. It is estimated that the fiscal collection could be sacrificing 1.8 million reales, but in turn, because of the development of the IoT sector that has a vertical for agriculture, it will instead bring in 17.1 million reales in terms. And in ending, the digital divide is the biggest Latin American challenge for digitalization. And closing this gap depends on the smart combination of several elements. The first is the most important, where the authorities in the case, the agricultural authorities have an important role to play here, is on a cross-cutting digital agenda that includes all sectors, where all sectors can contribute to effectively take connectivity to all corners. This digital agenda has to be followed at the highest political level, and the actions of the government institutions involved must be monitored. Investment, well, there must be a strong investment in market, and in as much as possible, we must avoid all these inconsistencies that have been affecting us. The universal service funds, as we already said, there must be full utilization of the funds in two lines: for the development of infrastructure and for direct subsidies to demand, in order to encourage, stimulate demand and ensure sustainability in the entire ecosystem. And of course, the use of ICTs and digital abilities and skills that you have talked about extensively. And agriculture is an anchor for demand to ensure sustainability for these projects. So once again, thank you all for the invitation and attention. I am at your service.
Muchas gracias, Maryleana.
Thank you very much, Maryleana.
El tema es muy desafiador,
It
interesante.
is a challenging and interesting topic, and everyone has so much to say.
Nosotros tenemos muchas preguntas,
We have
pero
several
vamos a
questions.
recopilarlas y
We will
después vamos a
compile and
enviarlas a
then
todos los
send them to our
panelists
speakers
para que respondan y
so they may
ayuden a
respond
responder a todos, ¿no? Porque ya
to
pasamos
ensure everyone
30
has
para
their
nuestro
answer, because we are now 30 minutes over our time.
para Emanuel.
With that, I give the floor to Emmanuel to close today's wonderful panel that we were participating in this afternoon. Thank you to Mr. Octavio, José Emilio, Maryleana, Camilo, Rocío, and all those that collaborated this afternoon. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Secretary, for your great role and everyone's excellent presentations. As the Secretary said, we have several questions and comments. We will be compiling them to ensure we can share the answers to not take up any more time. We'd like to close today's session. To conclude, I'd like to invite you on behalf of the Director General of AICA for this coming Tuesday. We will have the third session for this forum, focusing on digital agriculture experiences. Everyone is invited, and we'd really appreciate it if you can continue participating in a forum. With that, thank you all very much for excellent presentations and participation, and we wish everyone a good afternoon, good evening. Thank you.
Gracias.
Gracias a todos.
Adiós.
Gracias, buen día.
Hasta luego, muchas gracias, buen día.
Buen día.